Hello. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for joining us. So, I'm Rick Steves, and I've spent four months a year, every year for the last 30 years, running around Europe, making mistakes, taking careful notes in hopes that you can learn from my mistakes rather than your own and travel smoother and smarter. And right now, I want to take you to Britain, okay? We're going to go to England, and we're going to go to Wales, and I just want to share with you the best tips I can imagine to get the most out of that beautiful and exciting corner of Europe. So thank you for joining us in person, and if you're watching online, thank you for being with us via the internet. When you're going, dreaming about Europe, the first place to go really is Britain. That's just your starting point for European exploration. And I just love flying into London and then heading out into the countryside and enjoying a good, solid dose of Britain. When you think of England, you got all this sheep and beautiful pastoral fields and hiking and rolling hills. And of course, you also got big urban thrills. And it's nice to get a good balance of that when you're talking about Britain. When we do a tour through Britain, this is what we think is the best couple of weeks in Britain, and this is essentially what I'm going to walk you through now in this next hour. But if you look at England and Wales, and Scotland's up here, we're not going to talk about Scotland right in this talk, but almost all of us are going to be flying into London, and I would highly recommend flying into London but not getting over jet lag in London. From London, go directly to Bath, which is a much more charming, easy place to be when you're dealing with jet lag, and given the fact that the British drive on the other side of the road and the roundabouts and all this stuff, you're much more likely to not get run over on your first day if you're in a cute little town, okay? So save London for the end of your trip. From Heathrow Airport, scoot right out to Bath. Get over your jet lag there, and then what we're going to do in this PowerPoint is we're going to do Bath, do Glastonbury and Wells, the Cotswold villages, Stow-on-the-Wold. We're going to head north through the birthplace of the Industrial Revolution, Ironbridge Gorge, and then we're going to head up into northern Wales. I've traveled all over Wales, and if you got limited time, for me it's really clear for us, northern Wales is the most interesting part of that corner of Britain. And from there we drive north, stopping at Liverpool and Blackpool on the way to the pristine Lakes District, the Cumbrian Lake District, way in the north of England, Wordsworth country, Beatrix Potter country, and so on. And then from the north, we cut across England along the Hadrian's Wall, the wall the Romans built 2,000 years ago or so when they came and they spread that far north. And the big city in the north is Durham with its famous cathedral. Then we head down to York and then return to London where we started, and then you'll finish. You're well over jet lag now, and the finale of your trip would be in London. Do think about some strategies to save money because Britain is such an expensive place to travel. For instance, you might want to rent a car, but you don't want to have a car in the big cities where you don't need a car anyways. I would propose picking up the car in Bath, doing all the stuff I talked about, and dropping the car in York. Doing York and London after you turn in the car, and Bath before you pick up the car. Do you follow me? That's about half your time, really. And then you'll use the car where you want to use it, but you won't be wasting it in the big cities. We're going to start in London, and we're going to start in London in this slideshow. I want to just remind you, London is one of the great cities in Europe. If there's 4 cities in Europe you could spend a week in, just flying over there, ideally in the winter, cheap airfares, get one nice hotel, enjoy all the culture and everything, it would be London, Paris, Rome, or Istanbul. Those are my 4 big one city vacations. And London really is dramatic that way. If we think about London, we've got so many sites, and we've got the Thames River. Most of the city of our interest is north of the Thames. South of the Thames is called the South Bank. It used to be run down, but it's really been fixed up in the last generation. There's lots to see there. If you look at the Thames River on the left, you see Big Ben in the Halls of Parliament. Scooting up along Whitehall, that's the main political drag, it goes up to Trafalgar Square, where you've got the National Gallery. And then moving further east from Trafalgar Square, we get into the City of London, St. Paul's, the beautiful church by Christopher Wren, and the Tower of London, which was where London was, the Fort of London, the Castle of London was built in the 11th century when the Normans came in from France. That was the first sort of center of London, and we've got the Tower Bridge. There's a lot of great museums, the British Library, the British Museum, all the Theatre District, Buckingham Palace. All of this is actually quite close together. You wouldn't walk it, but you could if you really wanted to. The beautiful walk would be along the south bank of the Thames. It's actually called the Jubilee Promenade, and you can walk from the London Eye, that's the biggest Ferris wheel just across the river from Big Ben. You could walk all along the south bank of the Thames, past the Tate Modern Art Gallery, past Shakespeare's Globe Theatre, to across the river from the Tower of London down to Tower Bridge. And all along that way, there's all sorts of fun things to see and do. So you can see right there, there's a lot going on, and that's just downtown London. When you think of this grand, expansive city, you really need to harness public transportation. And I think it's just really important to realize that you want to get yourself a tube pass, and that covers you on all the buses, the double-decker buses, and on the subways. You don't really say subway. A subway is a pedestrian underpass. It's the underground or the tube when you're in London. We'll start with Halls of Parliament and Big Ben. Now, the Halls of Parliament has been the governmental center since the Middle Ages, for almost 1,000 years. And there was a terrible fire in the 1830s, and it burned it all down. And this was right after the age of revolution and all the neoclassical stuff that you can imagine. And the English people needed to rebuild their venerable Houses of Parliament, and they didn't do it in the prevailing style of the time. They decided to do it in the Romantic style, which was just coming up. And that was, rather than a stern, intellectual, neoclassical style like you might see at the Arc de Triomphe in Paris, it was a more emotional, neo-Gothic, neo-medieval style. So when we look at the Halls of Parliament and when we look at Big Ben, we're seeing 19th century, over-the-top, neo-medieval style, you see. When we think of the Halls of Parliament and Big Ben is not the bell tower. Big Ben is technically the bell in the bell tower, but we just call the whole thing Big Ben. But that really is an icon of London. One part of the palace that did not burn down in the 1830s was Westminster Hall. And this is precious because for 700 years, this was the High Court of England. And it has this 700-year-old oak hammerbeam roof that survived. And you'll walk through that today when you go to see the Halls of Parliament in action. Remember, one of the important things to do when you're in London is to see the House of Commons or the House of Lords. It's free. If they're sitting and in action, you can line up with all the local people that want to go to, like us sitting in on something going on at Congress, and you can do that. Your guidebook will explain how, but it's a very important thing to do. It's a free thing to do, and it's often possible to do it in the evening when other things are closed, because they often meet into the evening. So you'll have that opportunity, and when you go to see the House of Lords or the House of Commons, you will see Westminster Hall also. Across the street is Westminster Abbey. And for 1,000 years, this has been where the great kings and queens of England have been married and buried and crowned and you name it. And just recently, of course, it was in the news with Prince William and Kate. When you go to Westminster Abbey, it's expensive to get in, but it comes with an audio tour, and you'll get to see all the tombs of all the great royalty and all the poets and all the military heroes and all the composers and everybody. It's just a beautiful opportunity to remember the great culture of Britain. Now, across the river from the Halls of Parliament, you go right across Westminster Bridge, you've got this big Ferris wheel. And this is called the London Eye. And you can go to the top of that, and it gives you a grand view of London. And you just go one slow loop. Wedding parties rent out an entire bubble for their party, and it takes quite a while to go around, and they can just have their whole festival in that bubble. As a tourist, you can sit there and enjoy a commanding view all over town, even looking down on the Halls of Parliament and down on Big Ben. So it's really fun to go in the London Eye if you'd like to. I mentioned from Westminster and the Halls of Parliament and Big Ben and Westminster Abbey, you've got Whitehall. Whitehall was the name of the palace that burned down, and it stretched for blocks and blocks. Today, almost all of it's gone, but the street remains, Whitehall Street, and that leads from the governmental headquarters up to Trafalgar Square, where you have the National Gallery. And when you get to Trafalgar Square, you'll find the National Gallery, the greatest collection of paintings in Britain. It sort of rivals the Louvre. You'll see the National Portrait Gallery. And I would remind you, portrait galleries, national portrait galleries, are not as sexy as a lot of sites, but it's a great opportunity to walk through halls of great paintings of the great characters of that particular country. You can do it in Edinburgh, you can do it in Dublin, you can do it in London, and I highly recommend it. Both of those galleries are free, as are many of the great museums in London. Remember, London's a very expensive city, but the most important sites are often free or just ask for a donation. Along that Whitehall, you see a lot of military history. And during the darkest depths of the World War II, during the Blitz, when London thought it was going to be invaded by Germany, the government of Winston Churchill was literally underground. And you have that cabinet war rooms that were a time capsule and just recently opened up. And they were just like they were mothballed when they shut it off after the war was over. And it gives you an amazing look at what it was like to run the war from London and run the government from London when they were doing it all underground. Connected with the underground cabinet war rooms is a marvelous Winston Churchill museum. If you're interested in Churchill, if you're interested in the Blitz, you got to see that on your trip. London has so many amazing museums, and of course the British Museum is sort of the warehouse of all of Western civilization's treasures. You want to be sure to spend the better part of a day at the British Museum, and you've got the Great Court, and then you can see the whole story, all the ancient stuff, the Rosetta Stone from Egypt. You got the best collection of Egyptian art outside of Egypt, as far as I know. You've got Mesopotamian and Babylonian and Assyrian, all that kind of stuff, and of course you've got incredible Greek treasures, specifically the Parthenon frieze and all the great statues that were decorating the Parthenon, that the Greeks are not very happy about it, but the British have managed to get them up into London. By the way, I have been taking groups to Britain for a long time, and I just love our tour program for Britain and for Ireland and for Scotland. And over the years, I've written all these guided tours. They're in the guidebooks. I've been giving them to the groups. What I decided to do was make them for my app, and it's free, and anybody who's savvy enough to download an app can grab this thing. It's called Rick Steves Audio Europe, absolutely free, and you got tours of everything you need, all the major stuff in London. There's 4 or 5 different tours, and they work great. They'll save you a lot of money and a lot of time, and you just stick me in your ear, and I'll walk you through all these sites. So if you'd like to consider that, just download Rick Steves Audio Europe. It's also got the most important interviews from 8 years of weekly hours on public radio. I've deconstructed all these programs, and then I've organized the interviews in country-specific playlists. So if you're just going to Britain, you can pull out all the Britain interviews, and then you put it on your app, you put it on your mobile device, and you can listen to it offline whenever you like. On the flight over, when you're stuck in traffic, when your partner's sleeping and you're still awake, you got all that information that will help you better understand your sightseeing. But in the context of London, and if you're in the neighborhood, Edinburgh also, we've got these great walking tours. They work beautiful. I finished filming one day ahead of time just about a year ago, and I did a bunch of these tours over like a 10-hour day, and I was impressed how easy it is to follow them and how they make sightseeing through London a lot of fun. One of the stops is the British Library. And the British Library is a huge library, but there's one room that matters, and it's called the Treasures Room, and that's where you find the most important documents from Western civilization. The Gutenberg Bible, the Magna Carta, Handel's Messiah, handwritten Beatle lyrics. I mean, you got everything you can imagine right there. Lewis Carroll, Charles Dickens, William Shakespeare. It's just thrilling. The earliest manuscripts of the Bible, precious illuminated manuscripts, the very earliest maps, all there in this one room. Don't miss the British Library. The Tate Gallery is something that is just beloved in England for art lovers, and it's been split into 2. There's the Tate Britain with a lot of great 19th century British masterpieces, specifically the art of Turner and Blake and the Pre-Raphaelites. And then the modern has been put into this former industrial sort of building, and today it is the Tate Modern Gallery, and it's filled with surrealism and then right up to avant-garde contemporary art. It's a great museum, one of the greatest collections of contemporary art in Europe, and you can see that immediately across the river from St. Paul's Church. So remember, in the millennium, they had a lot of new buildings and new construction. They built this Millennium Bridge. It's the pedestrian bridge over the Thames River. You can walk from the Tate Modern immediately across the river straight to St. Paul's. Now, when you think about St. Paul's was built in around 1666. London had a horrific fire, and basically the whole downtown was burnt. And a young architect named Christopher Wren just happened to be looking for work, and he came into the city father's office, and he said, I know this is crummy, the fire's almost not cooled down yet, but I've got some great ideas for rebuilding the city. And it kind of worked into his career beautifully. He designed 50 different churches scattered all over the town. London rose from the ashes. parishes, and the centerpiece, of course, is St. Paul's. St. Paul's, 365 feet tall. It's an amazing church to check out, and when you go to London, you've got to go into St. Paul's. I've got an audio tour of that, included as one of my audio guides on Rick Steves' Audio Europe, and you can climb all the way to the very top of that dome, and then you can survey the whole city from there. If you look on the skyline in the distance, you can see the London Eye, the Ferris wheel, and that gives you a sense of how far it is from Big Ben to Trafalgar and then over to St. Paul's. So that's kind of the dimension of the city. In the other direction, well, then you get into the City of London. I just said the city, but I was a little improper choice of words, because in London, the 1 square mile business district, the Wall Street of the British Empire, is called the city. And when you hear people refer to the city, they're talking about that place that is thriving with people with their tightly wrapped umbrellas and their suits during the day, and at night everybody goes home and it's just much more empty. That's the thriving business center, and it is important to check out the city. And on the far side of the City of London, you find the Tower of London. Remember that key date, 1066. That's when William the Conqueror came across from Normandy and invaded England and basically took over it. It was the Norman invasion. And they brought with them the prevailing architectural style, which was Romanesque in the 11th century. Romanesque churches you've seen all over Europe. Well, when they come into England and they build a church done by the Normans in Romanesque style, they don't call it Romanesque, they call it Norman. So when you think of something being Norman in England, it's Romanesque, brought over by the Normans, all right? The Normans established their capital, their castle, right there in what is the Tower of London, very well fortified, and it's got a history of being well fortified, and that includes the very vigilant beefeaters, the guards. And these guys do more touring now than actual guarding. And the Tower of London is an amazing sight to see. It's very crowded, very touristy, a little expensive to get in, but it is well worth checking out. And included in your steep admission cost is a free guided tour by a beefeater. They are so boisterous and so entertaining, you gotta follow them around. But I would remind you, when you get there in the morning, if you take the beefeater tour, everybody's going to the Crown Jewels, and you have a long, long line. It's like, a ride at Disneyland. It seems like the line's just medium, and then you get inside, and it's 3 times as long hidden inside. It's the same thing for the Crown Jewels. I would recommend arriving early and making a beeline for the Crown Jewels. You'll save an hour in line, and you'll have the Crown Jewels literally all to yourself. And then go back and catch the beefeater tour. It'll save you a lot of time. The Crown Jewels, by the way, put all other Crown Jewels to shame. They are just mind-blowing. My guidebook to Britain and my guidebook to London describes all of this stuff very carefully. So I want to stress, I'm just ripping through this slideshow right now, but if you want the complete narration, all the blow-by-blow, all the details, all the strategies to enjoy it smartly and on a budget, get the Rick Steves London guidebook or the Rick Steves Britain guidebook, or whatever area you're going to. A lot of people really enjoy the pageantry in London, and for good reason. That's sort of London's middle name is pageantry, and most days through the season, May through September, you've got at 11:30 the changing of the guard at Buckingham Palace. Now you got to confirm at your hotel or on the web if it's going to really happen today, and then you got to look at your guidebook to find out exactly where to stand. The pageantry is a thrill. Everybody gets to see it. It's free, but if you want to actually see the changing of the guard, it's hard to actually see much at all except for other people's cameras and the big gate, unless you know where to stand. So be on the ball that way, but the changing of the guard really is a lot of fun. Covent Gardens is a touristy, kind of tacky shopping zone right now, but it's in a thriving old part of town, and it's worth checking out. And I want to remind you, Covent Gardens has its own antique market, but all over London, you've got antique markets, and they're oftentimes on different mornings, once a week, and you need to get a local periodical entertainment magazine to let you know where the different antique markets are happening. But I love that scene. Once in your visit in London, get up early in the morning and head out and see it and do an antique market. There's a lot of shopping to be had in London if you like to shop. It's not my forte, but people go to London just to shop, and understandably so. And Oxford Circle is sort of an epicenter of the shopping there. One place you do want to check out is Harrods, the grandest department store in Europe. And it does big and it does elegant at the same time, which is quite an accomplishment, I think. It is worth, even if you're not a shopper, checking out Harrods. It is a lot of fun. There's a lot of sort of tacky, gimmicky commercial ventures in London that actually get more people going to them than the National Gallery or the British Museum. There's the London Torture Dungeon, and, there's the Madame Tussauds Wax Museum and all this kind of thing. They're fun, but be careful you don't get suckered into a lot of stuff that's very expensive and very highly promoted. Your consumers, everybody wants your money. All the little flyers in the hotel lobby, those are business ventures that pay a lot of money to get the flyers in the hotel lobby, and if you just limit that for your sightseeing choices, you're really missing a lot of stuff that might be free and much more highly cultured. Not to say you shouldn't go to Madame Tussauds, but it is very expensive and very crowded, but how can you put a price on hanging out with the Beatles, huh? This is a wax tourist that is very tired, and I felt a lot like her while I was there. And at night, when you're traveling just in the evening in downtown London, you just want to be out and about. It is just a festival of youthful, creative, edgy culture. And again, study, know what's going on. You got all sorts of theater. In the West End, you can walk. Almost all the theaters are within a few blocks of each other, and there's always something exciting going on. I want to remind you the theater is quite expensive, but there's a famous half-price ticket booth on Leicester Square. You can go there and find any place that's got tickets on the push list, and they really are legit, and they are half price. I do want to remind you, everybody knows this little tip. Everybody goes, they go to Leicester Square and go to the half-price ticket booth. This is the legitimate one here. It's a freestanding kiosk in the square. All around the tube station, when you step out, you'll find other box offices that say the Leicester Square box office, half price, official, the real one, and all over England, when something says the real or the official, they're generally not. I mean, there's just this competition, and these guys are much more aggressive and not as legit as that kiosk that is really the venerable half-price ticket booth that you want to be sure to check out. If you're into Shakespeare at all, when you go to England, you got a chance to see the Royal Shakespeare Company, and it is really the way to experience Shakespeare, and the ultimate way to see it is in the Globe Theatre. The beautiful Globe Theatre, right in the banks of the Thames, was built just in the last generation in the same style that it would have been when Shakespeare was there. It's in the open, it's in the round, and nothing is amplified. You can tour it. It's a great museum. It's a wonderful tour given by local actors and actresses, and you can go to a play. And the cool thing about the play is it's done, as I said, in the traditional way, as Shakespeare would have done it. And Shakespeare wrote for the wealthy people who got seats and for the poor people who just sat around in the mud in front of the stage and laughed at all the dirty jokes. And Shakespeare would have two sort of levels of humor worked into his plays, and these were called the groundlings that were right down here. You guys are groundlings, okay? And I like going to the Shakespeare at the Globe because I just pay the cheap tickets. It's like just $10 or something for a groundling ticket, and then you can literally put your elbows on the stage and enjoy the play right there, and it's just a fun way to do it in a real Shakespearean way. All over London, you've got incredible concerts and culture and plays and events going on. And this is Royal Albert Hall here, where you can go to concerts quite easily. There's generally standing room tickets and standby tickets that you can afford. And you just need to get the local periodical entertainment guide. At the airport, when I arrive, I pick up the What's On or the Time Out magazine, and I just have that as my little sidekick to my guidebook. My guidebook tells me all the guidebooky stuff, but no matter how good the guidebook might be, it doesn't know what's happening this week. That's why you need to get the Time Out or the What's On. So get that periodical entertainment guide. Have some fun reading that. That'll get you right up to date. I can tell you for sure, Sunday morning, the action's at Hyde Park Speaker's Corner. And this is just grassroots democracy in action. Here they got the freedom of speech. And all sorts of generally, crackpot kind of guys are standing up, ranting and raving about whatever's going on. And they've always got a heckler in their midst. He's, ranting away about whatever he's interested in. And this guy here knows, the guy in the foreground knows all of his lines by heart. And every time this guy says something, this guy will say some insulting kind of joke to kind of make him sound silly. So here's another guy who's doing his thing as he does every Sunday, and then the guy behind him with his chin down is just waiting for his turn to chirp in and annoy the speaker. So there's this wonderful back and forth going on, and as a tourist, you just go from one little gathering of people to the next. It's a lot of fun. It's about midday on Sunday at Speaker's Corner. That's in Hyde Park. London is famous for its parks, and every time I've got some spare time in London, I just like to walk through the parks. It's just a delightful thing. There's parks all over the place. They've got beautiful monuments, beautiful ponds, beautiful little kiosks, beautiful scenes and vignettes of local people having a good time. Don't miss the parks while you're in London. It can be very, very hot and muggy in the summer. I've been there when it's been 100 degrees, and of course it can be very cold, bitter cold. If you're going in the off-season, dress warm. My British guides always tell me there's no bad weather, just inappropriate clothing. And I like to take walking tours when I'm in London, and these guides, it can be 20 degrees with a stiff breeze, and they're out there talking for 2 hours, and their people are just freezing. But these guys are dressed for the weather. You need warm shoes. I bring almost like, hiking boots with high top in the winter when I'm going there. It's almost like going skiing because you want to be out a lot. When you're in London, you're going to be out for hours on end, and it can be bitter cold. So if you're going to London in the winter, dress appropriate. You can ice skate in Somerset House. There's just a lot of fun in the winter. Anytime you go to London, a good way to get an overview of the city is to take the Round London Sightseeing Tour. Now, these are very competitive buses where you pay one price, and then you can hop on and hop off for 24 hours. And they have a route, and every half an hour a new bus is coming along, and you can hop off at every different site, stay for a while, and get back on the bus and carry on. Also, they come with live guides, and if I like the guide, I'll just stay on it for the whole tour because they're fascinating tours, and it just drives through the whole place. On a sunny day, they go topless, and you can stand up on the top there with your camera, getting all sorts of great shots, listening to your entertaining guide, who's just a motor mouth for the whole loop, and you can then use it again as a hop-on, hop-off service. Also important when you're in London is to remember the Blue Badge guides. All over the city, you've got hardworking, expert guides, highly trained, very proud of their blue badges, and these are the guides that can teach you what's going on in their town. And there's companies like London Walks that take you out on these beautiful walks in every different slice of London. You've got London of the Fire, London of Jack the Ripper, London of the Beatles, London of, the plague. You've got London of Churchill, and you just walk London of Christopher Wren, London of pub architecture. I've been on a lot of these different walks, and some of them are very obscure, and all of them are interesting. So they're cheap, they're done by very theatric and energetic experts. A lot of them are actors and actresses, and London Walks is a great company to look at. Use the underground. It's a big city. It's snarled in traffic. It takes forever to get anywhere unless you go underground. When I'm in a good mood as far as a traveler goes, I buy the 1-week pass. You get the Oyster card. You can buy it for 1 day, or you can buy it for 1 week, or you can buy a certain amount of money and then you use it every time. But I like to get the 1-week-long pass if I'm there. I actually buy it at the airport upon arrival, and for less than the cost of a taxi from the airport to my hotel, I have complete public transportation for the whole week. All the subways, all the buses. Do you see what I mean? Doesn't that feel good? You got to the hotel almost as fast just by using the metro, and you've covered, and that has saved enough money to pay for all your transportation in that otherwise very expensive city. Use the tube, get down there, figure it out. Everything is either north, south, east, or west. Many of the people in the tube speak English and can help you out. Ask for help. Use your map. Any map will have a tube map in it, and you can use that. And then you have London really by the tail. Remember, your tube pass also comes with the buses, and all of these beautiful red double-decker buses are yours too. They're not as easy to learn, but once you get the hang of the buses, they really complement the tube system very well. And I like sitting in the bus because I'm just in the top deck enjoying the scene. Many days after a long day of sightseeing, I see, oh, there's bus number 10, and it goes back to my hotel, or I could hop in the metro or the subway and go back to the hotel, and I think, I don't feel like walking. There's more walking in the subway. I got all the time in the world. I'd like to see the nice view. It's free for me either way. I'll climb up onto the top deck of the double-decker bus and just sit in the front row and relax and go through the traffic and work my way back to the hotel. Do you follow me there? You got those options, and it's just nice to know locals are very good at the bus, and we should figure that out also. Taxis in London can be a good value. They never rip you off. They're very carefully regulated, and they are experts. I've been in taxis in the United States that don't even know how to go to the airport in that town. It's just amazing sometimes how you have to tell a taxi where they're supposed to go. In London, every taxi can't be a cabbie without knowing every little tiny lane, so you'll have no problem getting where you want to go, and they just love to talk. And they give you a very candid and opinionated take on whatever is happening. I actually have a list of things I want to talk about whenever I get into a taxi, and I use it as a tour. And they love it. So if you got, and you can fit 5 people into a taxi. So if you're a group of 4 and time's worth anything to you, hop in a taxi. They're big, they're comfortable, they're classic, they're fun. Remember, there's a congestion zone in London, and if you are a driver and you drive into the center, you are given a pretty steep fee. I don't know how much it is, but I think it's like $15 or something like that just to drive into the town. It's designed to keep the traffic congestion away. Anybody that does go into town is billed that, and that money then subsidizes public transportation, conceivably so they can charge less for the buses, and there's more departures for the buses, and so there's less traffic slowing down the buses. It makes a lot of sense. That's the whole notion of the congestion fee. Now, when you think about the New London, it is outside of town to the east. This is the Docklands. You can get out there it's the Manhattan of London, really. You can cruise down the Thames River. By the way, a very entertaining thing to do. From Westminster, you can catch the boat, you can go upstream to Kew Gardens, you can go downstream to the Tower of London, and you can go further downstream to Greenwich, and that would pass the Docklands, or you can take the public transportation and the commuter train to the Docklands. Now, the Docklands, 150 years ago, was the biggest port on the planet, serving the capital of the empire upon which the sun never set. 50 years ago, container ships were too big, they pulled farther away, the Docklands were abandoned, they were run down, dangerous, just desolate. And then in the last generation, they've been recognized as great real estate, let's invest in it, and today you've got the new Manhattan of London emerging out to the east of the city. It really is important to check that out on your way to Greenwich. In the other direction, you've got Kew Gardens. Kew Gardens is a wonderful place if you're into botany, and you can have virtual jungle in London. Also outside of town, you've got Hampton Court and Windsor Palace, 2 very important royal residences. Out by Heathrow, you've got Windsor Palace, and right next to that, Legoland. If you've got kids, and they're Lego maniacs and you're not going to Denmark, you can go to Legoland right outside of London, and it really is quite impressive. The airports in London, mostly Heathrow and Gatwick are the ones you might be using, are both excellent. They both got great connections by train into the center of town, and I just love Heathrow Airport. I've got no problem with Heathrow at all. It's one of the busiest airports on the planet, and I invariably fly through Heathrow. I want to remind you, England is very good on security, and you'll find a lot of security at the airports, you'll find a lot of security at the train stations, and you'll find a lot of security at the train station for the Channel, the bullet train over to Paris. Remember now, more businessmen take the train to Paris than all airlines combined. It's the way to go from Paris to London. It costs about $100. There's 10 departures a day. It takes just a couple of hours, 17 minutes under the English Channel Tunnel, from Big Ben to the Eiffel Tower, just like that. It's an amazing experience. If you got 5 days in London and you're wondering what's the most interesting next thing to do, Paris. Seriously, round trip to Paris. You could have 10 hours in Paris and be back in time for dinner, or for bed, anyways. And it's just amazing how accessible Paris is now to London with the Channel. Great train stations from London. There's like 7 or 8 or 9 of them that will go to different regions around England. And by train, you can zip up to York and you can zip over to Bath. Those are probably the 2 most common ways to go. Okay, now, that was London. We're going to now go around the British Isles. We're going to start in Bath in the south, and we're going to loop around from Bath, looking at Glastonbury and Wells, up into the Cotswolds, heading north. Iron Bridge Gorge is the birthplace of the Industrial Revolution. Then we're going to go to the northern part of Wales, past Liverpool, Blackpool to Keswick in the north part of the Cumbrian Lakes District, along Hadrian's Wall, down to York. Cambridge and Oxford are 2 university towns. We'll take a look at them, and then you would finish off back in London. If you're considering going around London, this is what we consider is the best itinerary. Every one of these numbers is how many nights we would spend in that place, and this would be 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 13. So that's a 2-week trip right there. If you want the best 2 weeks in Britain, I would propose you check the 2-week tour that we do with our groups, and then you could do it on your own, or you could take our tour. But this really works well, and it's a nice measured look for variety and everything, look at the British Isles. Now we used to do a tour of South England, and South England is just charming and lots to see and do. We don't do that tour anymore, it just didn't sell very well, but I think it's a beautiful part of England, and it's a tour you might want to consider. Remember, when you're looking at the far south of England, you find these chalky cliffs. You've heard of the White Cliffs of Dover? Well, really, it's the White Cliffs of all across South England, from Dover all the way to Land's End. The whole south of England is built on chalk like this. And it's got a very thin topsoil. Consequently, all across South England, throughout this day, ever since ancient times, people have known if you just chip away the topsoil, you got bright white under that. And you can cut up a peace sign, you can cut up a fertility sign, you can cut up a Union Jack, you can cut up a Maltese cross, you can cut up whatever you want, just cut out the topsoil, and then you got this mammoth thing that can be seen from miles away on the hillside. That's because you got that chalky undersoil, and you can see that in the south of England, and this is called South Downs. It's near Brighton. It's a beautiful area to hike, and it's a very popular place for people who want to commit suicide to jump off. So be careful. It's dramatic scenery, and it's just and it's just drenched in history. You've got these old clapper bridges, and you've got stone circles and mysterious old bits from England's mysterious past. The most famous stone circle, of course, is Stonehenge. I want to remind you, there must be dozens of stone circles all around Britain. And I've been to many different stone circles. I became a travel writer at a desolate stone circle in the southwest of England in Dartmoor. It was called Gidley. And I just hiked across the middle of nowhere from the youth hostel, and I found this private Stonehenge. If you can imagine stumbling onto this, more run down and smaller stones, but the same sort of grandeur in a lot of ways, all alone, just you and a few ragamuffin goats and sheep and wild ponies. And I just thought, nobody's here. Everybody's with the big tour groups and the blowhorns and the porta potties and the barbed wire at their knees, clamoring to see Stonehenge when you got your own private Stonehenge just down the street. Remember that in England, you can explore around and find that. But whatever the case is, you got these circles that go back as old as the oldest pyramids, 5,000 years ago. Put there by Druids or by people way back then, nobody knows how, and they made celestial calendars. So they would know just according when the sun sets here or rises there, this is when you plant, this is when you harvest, this is when you party. And that's what was the celestial calendar. Avebury is just as accessible as Stonehenge, and in a lot of ways it's more interesting because it's more desolate. You can run among the stones. It's a stone circle within a stone circle, and a little town has grown up in its midst. So either Stonehenge or Avebury would be good to see. Wells is a city. A city, any town with a cathedral can call itself a city. So this is the smallest city in Britain because it's the smallest city with a cathedral. A great cathedral and wonderful Gothic architecture. It had this unique fix. The walls were starting to collapse in, so they did this scissors arch, and they kind of make it look like they planned it. But that's just a desperate move to try to stop the church from falling down. All over England, it's a struggle to keep these things paid for. It's just expensive. You know, they ask people to pay, but most people don't pay a voluntary donation enough to really help out. And they have cafeterias there, and they have bookshops and so on. Generally, when you go into these great historic sites that are just struggling to stay open, if you're going to buy souvenirs, if you're going to buy lunch, if you're going to buy coffee or tea, I like to buy it there. Same price anywhere. Here you're helping out the church, or you're helping out the abbey, or you're helping out whatever they're trying to keep in business. Remember Henry VIII is famous for breaking away from the church so he could divorce his wife. When was that, 1540 or something like that? Well, really what he was doing was he was struggling against the power of the church in a lot of ways, and he didn't like the power of the monasteries. Henry VIII dissolved the monasteries all across England. He just said, you own too much land, you got too much money, you got too much power, you are out of business, and he tore them all down. And he just owned the land. And today, all over England, you can find these ruined abbeys that used to be grand like this, that today are like that in their parks. A reminder that Henry VIII dissolved the monasteries back in the 16th century. Glastonbury is one of those places. My favorite town, in a lot of ways, in England is Bath. Bath is a wonderful place to get over jet lag. It is just a beautiful place. It's famous for its neoclassical architecture. Remember when the Normans brought in the Romanesque and they called it Norman? Well, in Europe, around the year 1800, neoclassicism was it, right? All this neoclassical, this Roman-looking stuff was being built. And in England, they called it not neoclassical, but Georgian, named after King George. George was the king on the throne when the American Revolution was going on. and it was just that period, and they call it Georgian architecture. You'll find these first grand sort of condominiums that are all uniform and elegant and well-designed, and that is Georgian architecture. All over England, all over Britain, you'll find Georgian manor houses. There's one right here, and you can go in, and it's all dolled up like it was 200 years ago, and there are these docents that are just volunteers, and they're in every room, and they will talk your ears off. If you want a friend in anywhere in Britain, go to these sites and let the volunteer docents tell you about the room you're in, and how all the goofy stuff people did back then to live up to the expectations of the age. Bath has been a resort spa for 2,000 years. Way back when London was called Londinium and Britain was Britannia, Romans went out to Aquasulis to take a bath. And they soaked in this mineral spa. Finally, I guess they just decided to call it Bath. So finally, I guess that is better. I was getting a little weak. Finally, they just decided to call it Bath. But the Roman town of Aquasulis became Bath, and it was a place people went through the centuries to soak in the mineral springs. You can see it right here. Ancient springs, medieval springs, and ancient Roman ruins. You can go down underneath. There's a wonderful Roman site for Aquasulis, and you can see this amazing statue here of the Roman god Minerva, really reminding us that this was quite an impressive Roman civilization back 2,000 years ago. In fact, they say in this part of England, if you scratch Gloucestershire, you will find ancient Rome. Anywhere you dig down, you'll find Roman mosaics and that sort of thing. There was so much Roman stuff going on. In Bath, you've got the pump room, where you've got the string quartet playing and all these elegant people serving you your cream teas and this sort of thing, as they did back in the good old days. In Bath, you've got a wonderful strolling kind of ambiance. You've got free guided tours given every day right in front of the tourist office, and you've got the hop-on, hop-off bus tours like you'll find all over Britain. Any place there's any good sightseeing, you'll find these hop-on, hop buses, and they are, as I mentioned, quite convenient. When you run around Bath, there's so many little cute souvenirs of ages past, of the Georgian times, basically, when the sidewalks were made really wide, so the women who have hoops in their dresses to show off their expensive fabric, would walk down, and where people had to have higher first floors so women with tall hairdos could actually stand up straight in them, and just so much wacky stuff going on in that high society time. You can learn all about it here in Bath, because Bath was the epitome of that wacky high society, and this is where they had sedan chairs, so people didn't have to walk, but people carried around in chairs. They say the word cheerio came from the time when it was time to go, you go chair ho, to call your chair. And people would say cheerio, all right? And they've got these snuffers. If you look at this outside of the old doors, that's where they'd put out their torch as they would carry people around town in their sedan chairs. So you wouldn't know that. You wouldn't know about the different fashions of the age and so on unless you took one of those tours. Follow up the tour with a visit to the Fashion Museum. It's one of the most, I'm not even that into fashion, but for 2 centuries, every decade, there's a mannequin and a good explanation about how fashion has evolved in England from those days right up to Twiggy and then on into our day, okay? So it's a fascinating look at British fashion history. I mentioned there are free guided tours given by the volunteers, the retired school teachers, and so on that join this club all over England. You got wonderful local people that just love to make a short story long, and they will take you out and talk and talk and talk, and when the tour is done, they probably want to sit down and have tea with you. It's just a charming way to get to know some people. One of my favorite evening activities in all of Britain is in Bath. I would put it on your list. Take the Bizarre Bath Walk. This is street theater. And these guys are just hilarious, and every time I go to Bath, I take the tour. It's always different. It's always a hoot. North of Bath, we get to the Cotswolds, and the Cotswolds are the epitome of quaint. As a travel writer, it's a temptation to overuse the word quaint. I save my use of the word quaint for the Cotswolds. This is Quaintsville. Cute little towns, cute names, cute lanes, cute hikes, cute thatched cottages. You want to make your headquarter either Stow-on-the-Wold or Chipping-Campden. I like to stay in Stow-on-the-Wold. This is the main square in Stow-on-the-Wold. And remember, the architecture is so charming and beautiful because they were filthy rich because of the sheep's wool. And they got so rich because of the great industry there, and suddenly cotton came along and something else happened, and the whole industry collapsed. And ironically, it was that downturn that mothballed that whole region, and then a century or whatever later, they discovered it perfectly preserved because it was so poor they couldn't rebuild it. Do you follow me? In many cases around Europe, something is really rich and elegant and gorgeous. Some catastrophe happens. They just ignore it. It's mothballed, rediscovered, miraculously preserved. And that's what the Cotswolds are. So today, they are rich again because everybody loves how they used to be rich, and they can go over there and live in these charming houses. Look at these beautiful houses. They are almost edible. They're so cute. I love walking in the Cotswolds. Take time to hike. That's what the Brits love. There's so many walking clubs. They got this rite of passage in England where everybody you cannot stop people from walking across your land. And you can put fences up because you got to keep your animals in, but everybody can walk across the land. It's a national right. In fact, once a year, the Rambling Club, all the hikers, they have what's called a mass trespass. And they go out and they all hike and they assert their right to walk across everybody's land. And as a hiker, you'll have good maps, buy good maps locally and take some of these hikes and assert your rights to be able to walk across every land. Beautiful little villages you'll find. This place is called Stanway House in the middle of Stanway. And this is an example of an impoverished lord. You've got all of these aristocrats in England that are land rich, that are very well bred, but have no money. They're very poor. They've got money, but they're burdened with a lot of expenses of keeping their place up to date, and they actually have to open their houses up in order to pay the rent. And you pay to see their house, and you get to meet them actually, and wander around and see how they live. And this is Stanway House. This is Lord Needpath. Somebody died, and he became a different level. Now he's the Earl of Weem or something like that, but I always knew him as Lord Needpath. But he's a wonderful man. He's a charming man. He's a brilliant man. He's really committed to the culture and the history of England, and he needs you to come to his palace and pay, or castle or his nice mansion and pay a little money and tour it. So you can find that as you travel around Britain. Another thing that's a lot of fun when you're in Britain is to go to the gardens. I'm not that enthusiastic about gardens, but every time I pay money to see a great garden in Britain or Ireland, it's a highlight for me. Hidcote Gardens in Cotswolds, Bodenant Gardens, I think, in northern Wales, Powers Court Gardens outside of Dublin. These gardens are just gorgeous, and make a point to see some formal gardens while you are in Britain. If you like Shakespeare, you're going to go to Stratford. It's a tourist trap, but it's a lot of fun to see. I would say you can see it pretty quickly. You can see the house where Shakespeare was born. It's just trampled with tourists and just as dead as he is, but it is something you gotta kind of check out. And every house that's associated with Shakespeare, Anne Hathaway's place, his grandmother's place, his kid's place, his kindergarten teacher's place, I don't know, that you can pay to see it. You buy this combo ticket and you can see all of them, and they do a good job of trying to keep the Shakespeare story alive. Definitely, when you're in Stratford, consider going to the Royal Shakespeare Company and the beautiful new theater there, and that would be one way to really appreciate the Bard. Nearby, in this part of England, you've got the best elegant royal manor house castle kind of in the countryside. Well, Blenheim Palace is nearby. That's the best elegant manor house. I don't have a photograph of it, but Blenheim Palace is incredible. And then Warwick Castle, of all the castles you might want to see. Warwick, it's very commercial. It's run by the same people that I think run Madame Tussauds and all these other highfalutin places. So you've got your peacocks, you've got your torture dungeon, you got your Madame Tussauds garden party, and you've got all the falconry and the jousting and everything you want. It's an amazing castle, and it serves the masses, it serves all the school groups, and if you're going to see one over-the-top castle in England, you might want to consider Warwick Castle. Farther north, we come to Iron Bridge Gorge. I, for some reason, am just enamored with Iron Bridge Gorge. This is the birthplace of the Industrial Revolution. This is the first place they really used iron in an efficient, economic, and industrial way. And that just opened things up for the industrial age. This iron bridge here was built in the same year as the American Revolution, 1776, and you can imagine what a new, exciting tool that was. And today you can see that old industrial town, and you can see different sites associated with the birth of the Industrial Revolution right there in Iron Bridge. And it's like an open-air folk museum to see those very early mechanical installations. Farther north, we get to York, and York really is the minster of, the way I understand it, Henry VIII didn't destroy the minster in York because he needed an ecclesiastical center for northern England for his administration. York was the transportation hub for trains in northern England. In a lot of ways, York is the capital of northern England. York has this incredible minster. The minster or the church is newly refurbished, and when you step inside, you find the widest Gothic nave in Britain. You find all sorts of glorious tracery, medieval stained glass, lots of history there, and it's right in the middle of the town. From the cathedral, you can walk into the town, and there are so many interesting sights to see in York. You've got the Jorvik Viking exhibit, and there's another museum that's just the county museum that covers a lot of Viking art. Remember, York was a Viking town 1,000 years ago, 1,200 years ago, and called Jorvik. You've also got the best train museum I've seen anywhere in Europe, if you're interested in trains and old locomotives and so on. It's a cultural look, a social look at the Industrial Revolution, as well as something that, people who like big engines would go to. There's lots there to see. And there is the York Castle Museum. 100 years ago, a visionary dentist decided they're tearing down all these shops, they're tearing all down our whole of our heritage, and he wanted to save it all. So he established this museum, and there's a lot of these kinds of museums around Britain, but the cool thing about the York Castle Museum is all these little shops that he saved are still stocked with the same things that were on the shelves 100 years ago. So you can wander through the York Castle Museum. I like to do it behind a couple of senior citizens that are local, and they can actually remember the candies and remember the way it was to go to the barber or whatever, and you can wander around and just get that little trip back in time. All over England, they're scrambling. They're very clever to get your money in tourism, and you'll find a lot of towns that have ghost-haunted walks and so on. They're kind of goofy and they're entertaining, but I would say if you're going to do a ghost walk, the place to do it is either York or Edinburgh, okay? And York is really great. There's all sorts of different kinds of ghost walks. I did several of them on my last visit, and I've sort of assessed them and analyzed them in my guidebook. But when you're in York, that's the place for your haunted walk. Now, that coast just beyond York, the east coast of the middle of England, has long been sort of a destination for people that want a boardwalk in a Coney Island kind of place. And you've got a famous resort port called Whitby, and that's quite nice. And also the boyhood home of Captain Cook called Staithes. But there's a lot of charming little places to check out in that part of England as you go further north and you finally get to Durham. Durham is famous. It's just a little university town, but it's most famous for this incredible cathedral, the Durham Cathedral. This is Norman, meaning it's before Gothic. It is English Romanesque. That would make it built in the 12th century about. And the Durham Cathedral is just amazing. Outside of Durham, you have the Beamish Open Air Folk Museum. If you like those open air folk museums, they're sort of culture and history on a lazy Susan for a busy traveler. Here we have life from the turn of the last century, circa 1900, all there for you to check out. And there's people who are role-playing, and there's period vehicles and so on, and it's just a lot of fun. I really think Beamish is quite nice. There are two great university towns in England, Oxford and Cambridge. Don't do both. Do one or the other. They're both great, but if you've got less than a month in England, you shouldn't do both. That's redundant. Do one or the other and save up time for something entirely different, like hiking in Wales or going up into the Cumbrian Lakes district or something like this. And Cambridge is better than Oxford, okay? Now, maybe academically you could debate it, but from a tourist point of view, I think Cambridge is just a lot more charming and enjoyable. They've got the river where you've got these punts, and you can go like the students and pole your way around. It's really very humiliating to try to do this elegantly, but you got to give it a whirl. You've got in Oxford and Cambridge, you've got this thing called the mix of town and gown. You don't have a campus like we've got here with 30,000 students. You might have 30,000 students, but it's scattered in colleges all throughout the town. So there's this beautiful mix, and the whole city is caught up in this. I just love it. And there are wonderful guided tours that will take you. They meet at the tourist office, and that's how you get into these different colleges, because otherwise they're kind of private. And it really is an amazing story. All these illustrious alumni, and you can go into King's College Chapel, for instance, and see beautiful perpendicular Gothic and Rubens paintings and the biggest collection of medieval stained glass in Britain, and there's lots and lots to see there in Cambridge, which actually is good to do as a side trip from London. I think it's just about an hour north by train. It's not a very good place for sleeping. I've never found good accommodations in Cambridge. You might consider doing it as a very easy day trip out from London, remembering that in England they have this thing about cheap day returns. If you're going to buy a round-trip ticket, it costs just a little more than a one-way ticket. Moving up the coast on the west, you come to Liverpool. famous, we know because of the Beatles, I think. It's also famous because it was an emigration point. Much of the Irish that fled the potato famine went to Liverpool to get to America. I was just at Ellis Island and looked up my grandfather's name, or my great-grandfather's name, and found he came from Norway to Liverpool and then across to America. Liverpool is a huge port for all of the emigration, and there's a museum about that. Liverpool has been run down, but like so many industrial age cities that have been run down, like Glasgow, like Hamburg, like Antwerp, like Porto in Portugal, like Bilbao, you have a huge resurgence right now, and they are just really getting with it. There's an energy, there's a lot of investment, there's a lot of creative energy and spirit, and here at Albert Dock in the center, you've got the nucleus of the new Liverpool. It really is one of the great cities in Britain to see. If you're a Beatle fan, there's not a lot left. Well, there's actually quite a lot left. You can go, the cavern's been replaced where the Beatles first started, but you can go and see Paul's house and John's house, and if you're into the Beatles, you can take these tours that show you, strawberry fields and all these different things you hear from the firemen in the roundabout, and all the lyrics that you would hear. And then these guys are just so passionate about it, they will bring it all to life for you when you tour strawberry fields and so on. Now, from Liverpool, you go a little bit north and you get to Blackpool. Blackpool is a disgusting place. And it's about the most visited place in England. Everybody goes there, but nobody will admit to it. It's the lowbrow Coney Island for people that cannot afford to fly to Spain, all right? It started out in the industrial age when there were no airplanes and everybody needed a break from the mines, and then we get in the trains, they'd go to Blackpool. They were afraid to go to sea, but they had these piers that went out into the water and then go out there and get some fresh air. They could eat their fish and chips. They could enjoy some white knuckle rides. They could take the trip up the little stubby Eiffel Tower they've got there. Blackpool it's a fascinating look at lowbrow working class England. And I go there, and I don't know whether to hate it or to love it. It's just so funky, and it's something to consider. I mean, it's just fascinating to look at British people sitting on the beach pretending it's sunny. It's miserable out, and they're still there with their sweaters on and their hats reading the paper on the beach. And you got the biggest connection of what they call white knuckle rides anywhere in Britain there. A lot of great rides, a lot of goofy entertainment, a lot of sort of searching and struggling people, and a lot of drag shows. So it's just, if you want a dose of Britain, it's reality, I'll tell you that. And one great thing about Blackpool, when you go to Blackpool, that makes the pristine beauty of the Cumbrian Lake District even better. For years, I was going from Blackpool to the Windermere Lakes District, and I thought, why do I love this so much? It was just a real breath of fresh air after this all fish and chips and cotton candy kind of stuff in Blackpool. The Lakes District. Oh, this is, this is the land of Wordsworth and all the poets and communing with nature and all these gorgeous lakes up in the north of England. When we go to the Lakes District, I want to remind you, there's a lot of the Lakes Districts. Windermere itself is the most famous part. It's the most touristy and traffic jam, and I don't like it. I would go farther north, making the town of Keswick your headquarters, and doing the Cumbrian Lakes District in the north. There's these peaks. There's 200 or some peaks. They're called Wainwrights. And Wainwright was an earlier guy who mapped all these peaks and a nature enthusiast, and a lot of people try to climb every little peak. The highest peak in England is, I think, 3,200 feet high. I mean, that's not very impressive. But there's a lot of these little peaks, and they give you a very cheap King of the Mountain feeling, I'll tell you that. When you go around the Lakes District, I would climb, this is one of my favorite walks, it's a place called Cat Bells. Cat Bells, just an easy walk from Keswick. And I just love being on top of Cat Bells. It's just 1,500 feet. It's just a couple hours walk from your bed and breakfast in Keswick, and it is thrilling. I do want to remind you, by the way, we've got about 8 shows on Britain that we've done. All of these shows, half hour each, are available for free anytime on our new website. You just go to ricksteves.com, and then you go to the TV section, and you look at Britain, and then you can see a whole half hour just on the Lakes District, or a whole half hour on Wales, or a whole half hour on York and Bath, or 2 or 3 half hours on London. So remember, it's all there, it's free, and you can get it anytime. Just go to ricksteves.com and click. And you can hike with me and my crew to the top of Cat Bells. Remember Keswick, Keswick, is your home base, and it's on Derwent Water. It's a lake called a water, Derwentwater, and there's this little boat that'll go around the lake, and it'll let you get off anywhere you like, and then you can hike to your heart's content and grab the boat at the other dock and continue circling the lake back to your spot. All over the Lake District, you got beautiful places to check out, gorgeous hikes, endless things you can do. This is the main square in Keswick, and I just love staying in Keswick. There's something about it that's just great. Remember, this is the neighborhood of the great poet Wordsworth. And this is the Romantic Age, when people were not going to the fancy salons in Paris or the palaces in Venice to hang out with the cultural big shots. They were coming up to the Lakes District and walking through the woods with the poet Wordsworth. This is when part of the daily academic diet of every scholar at Oxford and Cambridge was to walk through the woods and commune with nature. And when you go to the Windermere Lakes District, the Cumbrian Lake District, you can understand how the British would just get really pulled into the awesomeness of nature. There's more youth hostels per square mile in the Cumbrian Lakes District than anywhere else, and they need every one of them. There's so many people up there enjoying nature, and it's easy to do. You can go to Wordsworth's house. He had two different houses, one humble and one after he was more successful, and you can see how he was inspired by nature. And remember, you've got your own special stone circle up there called Castlereagh. Castlereagh Stone Circle, a great place to have that kind of wonder. Now, we're way in the north edge of England, and cutting across the north edge of England is the Windermere, is the Hadrian's Wall. 72 miles from coast to coast, built in, I think, the year 122. Remember, the Romans spread as far north as the north edge of England. They got all the way up there and they said, okay, this is good enough. Let's call it an empire. I don't want to mess with Scotland. We'll just build a big wall right here, okay? And they built this wall all across England, and they fortified with a mile. Every mile was a little fort called a mile fort. And then it was wide enough so chariots could run along the wall and reinforce the different forts. And they had their guys fortifying that against the barbarians to the farther to the north. It's an amazing thing to think about Romans being stationed way up in this godforsaken corner of the ancient world when they could be down in Rome. And it's just fascinating to me. And there's beautiful, it's not godforsaken today. It must have been godforsaken without heaters, okay? Because it is cold and brutal in the bad season from a weather point of view. You can walk across Hadrian's Wall. It's a beautiful, popular hike. If you got a car, you can car hike it. You can stop in many places along the way, and it's just one of the most evocative and beautiful parts of the British Isles. Anywhere you're traveling in Britain or Ireland, you can stay in people's homes. These are bed and breakfasts. And I just love the bed and breakfast scene when I'm in Britain. You can book these in advance. You can find them in your guidebook. And you can just stroll down the street and find it on your own. It's nice when you're driving, you got the mobility, and it's fun to look at a few, but this day and age, people normally just get online and book it that way. Double the cultural intimacy for half the price of a hotel when you stay in a B&B, and you get your own temporary local mother. I just love it when I'm staying in these places, and, you know, Kathleen is really excited that Ricky from Seattle is here, okay? I really can't say enough about B&Bs. And if you want a good dose of country hospitality, right down to the hot water bottle in your bed to warm up the sheets before you climb in, you go to a farmhouse B&B. And you'll find these all over the countryside in Britain. I don't list a lot of these in my guidebooks, but if you're really curious about B&Bs, get online or get a guidebook that's passionate about them and have that information so you know what your options are. But they're very charming. They're very comfortable. If they got the toilet and shower down the hall, that's just fine. These are really almost over the top in comfort, and you'll get this kind of charming experience, and you get to know a family. I've got a lot of bumps on my head from charming half-timbered houses, though, so if you happen to be tall and you get a room up on the top floor, be careful. If you're traveling with a family, remember you can stay in hostels all over the place. It really accommodates families nicely, and if you're driving around, you'll want to call in advance. You can cook for the price of groceries in the hostels, or you can call B&Bs, and remember, the more people you put into the room, generally the cheaper it gets. In bed and breakfast, that comes with breakfast, and this is a hearty breakfast designed to keep you out in the fields all day long working or sightseeing or whatever you're doing. It's just a well, a lot of people call it a heart attack on a plate, all right? If you don't want all those eggs and all that pan-fried toast and all the grease, you can have a healthy option, and British B&Bs are really into healthy options now. Whatever the case, you'll have a huge buffet, and a wonderful part of your day is the breakfast that comes with the B&B. I want to remind you, in Britain, they got a different adapter. All of your electronic gear these days is 110 to 220. Don't worry about the old-fashioned converter. If you've got a camera or an iPad or a laptop or whatever, it'll plug in, it'll work over there just like here. The problem is your plug won't fit into the wall. So you need to get an adapter. These just cost a couple bucks, and it's those 4 big rectangular prongs rather than our 2 little rectangular prongs. On the continent, the adapter is 2 little circles, round prongs. In Britain, in Ireland, you got the big herky adapter. And when you plug it into the wall, remember, a lot of times it won't work because you got to turn it on. There's a little flip at the socket, and you flip that flip on, and you'll learn sooner or later that that's how you warm up your tea. Okay. There are all sorts of youth hostels in Britain. Many of them are historic castles, and I think those are a lot of fun if you're a vagabond or a backpacker on a tight budget. When it comes to eating, remember Britain is very expensive, but you've got a lot of sandwich shops and delis and little cafes that do a good job of, microwaving a Cornish pasty or something like this. You're dealing with pounds and pence. This is a very, very old sign, so forget the cost here, but it's about $1.60 for a pound. That means if something cost 90 pence, it would be $1.50. If something cost £1.50, it would be about $2.25, okay? Just add 50%, and you got the cost in dollars. This is in a tea room. A lot of museums and Wordsworth's houses or churches or whatever will have their little cafe, their little tea house, and it's a very charming area to have your scone and your tea and this kind of thing. I never drink tea in the United States, but when I'm in England, a spot of tea just feels right, you need to kind of embrace the tea and the scones and all of that stuff. When it comes to eating, your best value is in the pubs. Pubs are real. Some pubs just want to serve beer, and you can tell by the way they present their food and their menus and so on. But other pubs are gastropubs. They take their food very seriously, and it's the best deal going, all right? Wonderful ambience, basic, good quality food, and a great price. Again, you take the price, and these are old prices, but if it's 10 pounds, it'd be $16 for that plate. All over Britain, you got wonderful pubs, and this is just an example of the quality of food right here you'll get in a pub this day and age. That would have been unthinkable in the old days when Britain was the butt of a lot of jokes with their food. Now they've got very nice food and very nice pubs. Learn about the whole beer etiquette, Learn about how silly it is for a man to order half a pint. You have a full pint. That's what you need to get if you want to be not getting a lot of ridicule from the locals. Learn about a lager, learn about a stout, learn about the local beers. Be adventurous. Remember, a pub is a public house. It's where the whole neighborhood goes to meet people. If you sit at the table, you might get some privacy. If you sit at a stool at the bar, you'll have all sorts of friends. It's multi-generational, men, women, grandma, the kids, the dog, everybody is there. Throw some darts, tell some jokes, go on quiz night, whatever. Have some fun with the locals in the pub. Use your vehicle to get off the beaten path. It's so important these days. Many of us just go the bullet trains and the freeways. If you find a severe dip, you can stop and take a picture of it. You've got the British driving on the left side of the road. Don't say the wrong side of the road. It's the other side of the road. They were driving this way before we were driving on our side of the road. It's not the wrong side of the road. If one side makes more sense, I suppose it does make more sense to approach traffic with your sword hand on the inside, like they do, to defend yourself, you see. And thankfully, the pedals work. If you have to drive, often in Europe, you need to use a stick shift if you rent a car. So if you can't drive a stick, you better be sure you're getting an automatic, because that can be a rude awakening. The pedals work like ours do, pedal and clutch, but the stick here is different. It's on the other side, as you can see in this photograph. So it's a little bit of adjustment. I recommend not learning how to drive in Britain in London with jet lag. That's why I say go to Bath, spend a few days there, and pick your car up in Bath. You're much more likely to survive your first day on the road in a small town. And be in a humble frame of mind. If you're ever in a near head-on collision, I would bet you're on the wrong side of the road. It says look, it reminds you to look right, look left, whatever. I look every possible way before ever stepping into traffic. Look every way. Never be assured that you know from where the traffic is coming. It includes when you're walking or driving. And in Britain, they've got these wonderful roundabouts. Roundabouts used to stress me out because I never knew what is my correct exit. How would I know? I've never been to this, and the way they assign things is kind of confusing to me. What I learned after lots of stress was we got to wing into that roundabout. Remember, you merge in, and then make a pact with your navigator that you're not going to try to leave on your first circle. You're going to do an exploratory loop. And you're going to do another exploratory loop if you want to. It doesn't matter. Nobody else is still there, so nobody knows you're in your third loop. You can go around until you're good and sure. Talk about all your options. If you're not absolutely sure, take another. And then with all the confidence in the world, you wing off on the exit of your choice. Because if you do it in a harried way, like which one is it? Oh, take that one, like we may never see it again. You don't know for 5 miles if it was the right exit. And then you realize, oh, and you got to come all the way back. So enjoy the roundabouts. Make them fun. Get rid of the stress. That's very important. The trains in England are expensive, among the most expensive in Europe per mile, but they're also very good, and they're easy to navigate, and there's lots of people to help you out in the trains. I think the train system in England is wonderful. I do want to remind you, it's a beautiful place for taking advantage of local walk-in tours all over the British Isles. You've got good walks. A lot of them are free or almost free, done by volunteers through the tourist office. The museums are charming in the way they explain all of their rich history and enjoy the fact that we speak the language. So every little funky 2-bit museum, you can read everything there. You're not going to get that on the continent. So then you go to this little museum here, and you can look at this skull with a big gash in it, and it says, this is a late Saxon skull, wounded by a blow from a battle axe or heavy sword. Many such injuries have been found on Anglo-Saxon skulls. This one shows no trace of healing, and there can be no doubt that death must have occurred almost at once. That was a serious blow to the head. And I just find it so interesting to go to these museums and see this armor. And we just look at armor, but it's full of dings, and it's just been all beat up. And these guys were fighting for their lives in there 800 years ago. Remember, the weather is horrible in England. Don't let it keep you down. You've got to get out and do it. If you look out the window of your bed and breakfast and you go, oh, it's raining, you're going to be inside all day. The weather changes 5 times a day. Face the weather, have your Gore-Tex, borrow an umbrella. Many times I borrow a parka from my bed and breakfast and get out there and do your stuff because it'll be off and on. It's just, as I always remind my travelers in England, they say there's no bad weather, just inappropriate clothing, okay? So have the right clothing and get out there and do it. Wales is a very easy visit from England, and it's just a logical side trip. The South of Wales has plenty of charm, but if you just got a few days, I would focus on the north of Wales, and my favorite stop would be Conway. Conway is a wonderful city on the north, and it's got an incredible castle, and this is part of Edward I's Ring of Iron. Remember, England had to work very hard to quell the indigenous Welsh, and this was in the 13th century, I think, and Edward I built 17 mighty castles all across Ireland to keep the indigenous people down. Think of what it's like to keep indigenous people down. Even today, it's hard to keep indigenous people down. England's trying to do it in Ireland. We're trying to do it in different places. Russia's trying to do it. I mean, this is what empires do. And in the old days, they had to make these castles. And around the castle was a green zone, and it was a garrison town. And it had to be, when we went to Baghdad, we had our green zone, and we had to keep the indigenous people down, and we had a airport, and you had to fly in like a spiral to get down safely. Well, you had to support that garrison town, and then what Edward I had to do was have fortified ports so he could help them by sea, and the ships would come in, but these garrison towns were embattled, surrounded by angry Welsh people. And until they were able to quell those people, it was a bunch of tiny little enclaves of England in what was generally wild and woolly Wales. Conway is a great former garrison town, beautifully preserved within its walled structure, and you can tour that castle. Conway is your best look in so many ways at Welsh culture in the north, a great home base from where you can side trip and see many of the other castles. Perhaps the most famous is Caernarfon. famous because this is where the Prince of Wales is invested. And you can go visit Caernarfon Castle. And from Conway, you can venture into the Snowdon National Park. This is the most beautiful, beautiful terrain in that part of Britain. And when we go through Snowdon National Park, we'll find all sorts of beautiful hikes, little mountains to scale, trains to take, woolen looms and industry, and most importantly, slate mines. Many of the slate roofs in Europe were mined right here in northern Wales, a very tough industry. This is where you have that culture where the men were singing in the mines and all that. And to this day, you can find hard scrabble mining towns struggling to make it, and a lot of them, the mines help pay the bills by letting tourists go through and putting on a hard hat and learning about mining back then and back there. You can ride these trains way deep, and then your guide will take you around. You can see them splitting the shale or the slate to make the slate roofs. It's just a beautiful industry to tour when you're in northern Wales. Remember, the industrial age had a lot of shipping to do, and they didn't have freeways back then, and the efficient way to get it there was on canals. Of course, nobody would ship industrial goods on canals anymore in Britain, and they've turned these old industrial age canals, like our Erie Canal, into recreational byways. And canal vacations are very popular in Britain, and you can walk along the canals, and it's just a beautiful opportunity when you're traveling. So that's our look at England and our look at Wales. Once again, we started in London, and then we went west over to Bath. From Bath, we side-tripped around to see Wells and Glastonbury, where the Holy Grail, they think, might be. We saw Stonehenge and Avebury, the two famous stone circles. Then we went up into the Cotswold villages, where all the sheep wool paid for this beautiful architecture. We considered staying in Chippingcampton or Stow-on-the-Wold. We visited Stratford-upon-Avon, the home of Shakespeare, Warwick, the very nicest castle to see in England. We went up to Ironbridge Gorge, the birthplace of the Industrial Revolution. From there, you could side trip into the north of Wales that I was just talking about before heading north to Liverpool, Blackpool, Keswick in the north part of the Lakes District, cut along Hadrian's Wall, see Durham with its famous Norman Cathedral, head south to York with so much to see and do before zipping back to London with a possible stop in Cambridge. I hope that gives you some ideas on how to enjoy Britain, and I want to thank you for taking this class and wish you happy travels. Thank you very much. Thank you.